I'm having an affair, she said plainly. At first, her words didn't quite click in my head. I heard them, sure, but my mind either refused to process or simply didn't want to. Arya sat there, watching me intently as I took another bite of the marinated pork she had cooked for dinner. It was fantastic, but her gaze made it hard to enjoy. "Did you hear me, Swin?" she asked again, her tone sharper this time. I nodded slowly, still preoccupied with the amazing taste of the food. My thoughts were sluggishly untangling her words. "I heard you," I finally said after swallowing. "I said, I'm having an affair," she repeated, emphasizing every word like I hadn't understood. "There's no need to repeat it," I replied, my voice calm but detached. She took another piece of her dinner, her fork moving almost mechanically. She seemed to be waiting for my reaction, but I couldn't give her one just yet. "By the way, the pork is excellent," I muttered. "Seriously? That's all you have to say?" Arya snapped, her voice rising. "I just told you I'm having an affair, and you're commenting on dinner? Can you stop using that word?" I hissed through clenched teeth, trying to keep myself composed as the full weight of her confession started to sink in. The questions began forming in my mind: who, when, where, and of course why. After a moment, I asked, "How long?" Her face tightened slightly. It was the first sign that she felt even a shred of discomfort. "A couple of months," she admitted reluctantly. "A couple of months," I repeated, setting my fork down carefully. "Well, that certainly explains tonight's dinner. I take it this is our last one together." Arya blinked, startled by my words. "What? No. What do you mean, last dinner? Why would you say that?" I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands on the table. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You've been having an affair for months. You make us this amazing meal tonight, just the two of us, and now you decide to confess. What am I supposed to think, Arya?" Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a heavy sigh. "I'm not leaving you, Swin," she said softly. "Then why tell me this? Why now?" Her voice cracked slightly. "I couldn't keep lying to you. The guilt was unbearable. I hated it." I scoffed bitterly. "You hated it? Just not enough to actually stop, right?" She looked down at her plate and groaned. "I had to tell you. It was eating me alive." "Oh, I'm so glad you feel better now," I said sarcastically. "So, who is he? The guy who's been messing around with my wife?" Arya hesitated, clearly not wanting to answer. "You don't know him," she said quickly. "He's not from around here. Don't play games with me, Arya." "Who is he?" I asked again, my voice sharper. Her lips pressed into a thin line before she finally spoke. "He's a production manager I work with. His name's Phil." "Phil?" I repeated, the name leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. "From Tisdale. And I suppose you've been sneaking around during your work trips." She nodded silently. "So what exactly did you think would happen tonight, Arya? What was the plan?" She looked away. "I didn't have a plan. I needed to tell you." "How could you?" I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. "I've never been with another woman." "I know," she sighed, her tone a mixture of regret and resignation. "I've realized that, but it feels like you don't care anymore. Like nothing matters to you, and you don't even think about sex." Her words cut deep, sharp and unrelenting. Yes, I knew we had problems, but damn it, life had been pulling me in 1,000 directions. Work, keeping the house in order, taking care of the car, our daughter, and my aging parents. There was always something demanding my time. "I didn't know how to start," Arya continued. "I tried, Swin. God knows I tried. But every time I tried to talk, you'd roll over and go to sleep, or you'd just change the subject. Sometimes it's so hard to talk to you, even after 17 years, or maybe because of them." "Well, wonderful news, Arya," I shot back, sarcasm dripping from every word. "But don't think I'm going to accept that weak excuse for your betrayal. I'm sorry I didn't meet your high standards as a lover. I hope Phil from Tisdale does a better job." With those parting words, I pushed my chair back sharply, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. Standing abruptly, I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door. I'm going for a walk, I muttered as I slipped my arms into the warm fleece-lined sleeves and stepped into the cold night air. The wind bit at my face as I passed through the gate, and I immediately regretted my hasty exit. But I needed space no matter how cold it was. Trudging up the narrow street, I tried to untangle the mess in my head. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd find myself in this situation. Sure, things hadn't been perfect lately, but isn't that normal in a long marriage? Every couple faces rough patches, right? I shoved my hands deep into my pockets, shoulders hunched against the sharp wind, and kept walking, my thoughts churning. Arya and I had both been busy. She traveled constantly for her job as a quality manager for a major supermarket chain, and I was always tied up with my increasingly demanding work. It wasn't ideal, but we made it work, or so I thought. For her to drop this bombshell the way she did was incomprehensible. My mind raced, turning over the same agonizing question. What now? Divorce? The thought made me sick. But could I forgive her? That felt even worse. Divorce would mean selling the house, splitting our assets, and becoming the subject of endless gossip. It was like there were no good options, only bad ones. All the old clichés kept running through my mind. Never trust a cheater. A leopard never changes its spots. Once a cheater, always a cheater. They all felt painfully true. How do you trust someone who's ripped your heart out? The cold finally drove me back home. When I stepped inside, the warmth of the house was a stark contrast to the icy air outside. Arya had cleared the table, done the dishes, and poured me a glass of brandy. I thought you might need this, she said, gesturing toward the glass on the coffee table. Thanks, I replied, pulling off my jacket. It's not poisoned, is it? She laughed softly, a sound that still stirred something in me despite everything. If I were planning to poison you, do you really think I would have confessed first? She quipped, smirking. Arya was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked beneath her. She looked as beautiful as ever. Her olive-toned skin, striking green eyes, and elegant features still turned heads. Even now, I could see why other men found her captivating. Come sit down, Swin, she said, patting the cushion beside her. Reluctantly, I sat down and picked up my brandy, sipping it slowly. She sipped her wine, her gaze distant. I don't know why you decided to destroy our family. I began, my voice heavy. Maybe I'm not the best lover, but tonight, Arya, you ripped my heart out. For God's sake, I've dedicated my life to you. Setting down her glass, Arya wiped at her eyes. I know, Swin, she said quietly. I've never doubted your love, and I still love you. I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. How can you say that? You just told me how terrible I am as a lover, and now you're professing eternal love. It's not like that, she said, her voice pleading. I'm not saying you're terrible. I'm saying we both let things fall apart, and I'm just as much to blame, maybe even more. Sure, Arya, I said, finishing my drink. But here we are. Tomorrow I'm calling a lawyer during my lunch break. We'll figure out what comes next. Arya stiffened beside me, her sharp intake of breath audible. So that's your answer? Separation. What did you expect? I asked, my tone colder than I intended. I don't know, she stammered. I guess I was hoping for something else. But if that's what you want, then fine. Her voice had an edge now, a chill that matched the night air. She stood, taking our glasses to the kitchen. When she returned with a fresh glass of wine, she sat down again. I was afraid this is how you'd react, she admitted. But I hoped this could be a turning point for us, a chance to rebuild. I frowned, shaking my head. You think we can fix this? After what you've done? Yes, Swin, she said earnestly. I love you, and I want to be with you. I just thought, if we could be honest, if we could talk, we might be able to find our way back to each other. We sat there again, locked in silence, the weight of everything suffocating. Then, as if a few rusty gears in my head finally started turning, I felt a light bulb switch on. Wait a second, I gasped, leaning forward slightly. You know what? I just realized something. Something must have happened to scare you. Something that made you worry I'd find out about your affair from someone else. That's why you confessed, isn't it? Damage control, right? You figured telling me yourself would soften the blow, maybe make me more forgiving. Arya's expression of complete denial was almost laughable. That's not true, Swin, she protested indignantly. I'm trying to be honest with you. Maybe, I muttered, shaking my head. But there's no way to prove that, is there? All I see right now is someone trying to minimize the fallout of their actions. But let me tell you, it's not working. She took a deep breath, her teeth catching her lower lip as she shrugged helplessly. I don't know what else to say, Swin. Oh, how about starting with I'm sorry? Or maybe, it was a mistake, and it's over now. I growled sarcastically. She flinched, recoiling slightly as she leaned back on the couch. I've already tried to apologize, she mumbled, avoiding my eyes. And yes, it's over. Her defeated attitude grated on me, and I couldn't hold back any longer. I've had enough, I snapped, standing abruptly. I'm going to bed. Arya looked up nervously. Should I come with you? No, I replied coldly, not even glancing her way. It's best if you take the guest room tonight. Her voice wavered behind me as I headed for the doorway. Swin, this doesn't have to be a war, you know? I paused briefly, nodding slightly without turning back. Maybe not, I said. But right now, a war is the only thing giving me any satisfaction. I left her there and went to bed alone. The next morning, Arya was already up, and breakfast was on the table when I came downstairs. She looked fresh and radiant, like she'd spent the night at a spa instead of in the guest room. Good morning, Swin. How'd you sleep? She asked brightly. Fine, I replied curtly, digging into my food. To her credit, she put effort into creating a relaxed atmosphere. She kept the conversation light, chatting nonstop about everything except the elephant in the room. But I wasn't ready to engage. After a restless night spent tossing and turning, the fire of anger still smoldered, and I knew that if I let it out, it would reignite the war. Half an hour later, I left for work. Over lunch, I met with a lawyer I'd worked with before, explaining my situation and seeking advice on divorce. He arrived prepared, armed with a stack of documents and a pragmatic attitude. Infidelity doesn't matter much in today's legal system, he explained. It's all about dividing assets fairly. That stung. It didn't matter who was at fault. Everything would be split evenly. Our house, my business, savings, everything we'd built together over 17 years would be divided. Arya, with her stable job and independent income, wouldn't face much difficulty moving on. After the meeting, I sat alone in my office, savoring the quiet and trying to formulate a plan. The thought of starting over at 46 was daunting. Could I really dive back into the dating pool? The idea didn't fill me with hope or excitement. It terrified me. That evening, Arya called. Are you coming home, or should I expect you to stay somewhere else tonight? She asked, her voice carrying a mix of disappointment and hope. I'm finishing up at the office, I replied flatly. Should I hold off on dinner? She pressed, though I could hear the frustration creeping into her tone. No, don't wait for me, I said. Should I stay up? I'd like to talk, she added hesitantly. Go to bed, Arya, I told her. Can I come back to our bed?
No, y replied firmly.
I think it's best if you stay in the guest room for now. Her sharp intake of breath was audible even over the phone. Is that really necessary? Necessary? Maybe not, I admitted. But it's a good idea. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. You always think you know what you do in situations like this, until it's actually your life falling apart. When I finally got home that night, the house was quiet and dark. After pouring myself a drink, I settled into the living room. The silence was comforting, and for a moment, I let myself relax. As I walked down the hallway toward the bedroom, the guest room door opened, and there stood Arya in a thin, sheer nightgown. She whispered softly, "Hi, honey." I wanted to brush past her, but she reached out, stopping me. "Swin, please," she said. Can we at least try to be civil? I know I messed up, and I know you're angry, but we can act like adults. If being an adult means cheating and lying, then I'll stick to my childish ways, thanks, I replied, pulling away. Good night, Arya, I added over my shoulder. Good night, Swin. Sweet dreams, she replied, sadness dripping from her voice. I'm certainly not thrilled with your revelations, Arya, I replied, my tone sharp. Arya looked stunned, her eyes wide with disbelief. Are you serious? You don't care? She snapped, her voice rising. That's exactly why we're in this mess. You've lost your passion for life, Swin. You're stuck in this endless routine, work, home, work again. We don't go anywhere. We don't meet up with friends anymore because you just don't care. None of it matters to you. By the end of her rant, she was practically shouting. We're in this situation because you couldn't keep your damn legs together. I roared back, my anger boiling over. Don't even think about dumping all the blame on me, Arya. You could have talked to me, explained how you felt, what you needed. But no, you chose this. You made the decision to look for excitement somewhere else. Her tone softened slightly as she sighed, regret flickering in her eyes. You're right. It was my choice and I regret it. I should have been braver and tried to talk to you first. Maybe then we would have had a chance. I shook my head, the bitterness in my voice cutting through the air. But I can't get past your infidelity, Arya. I've thought about it over and over these past few days, and my decision hasn't changed. It's just too complicated. Even if I tried to forgive you, it would take months, maybe years, to rebuild any sort of trust. It's over, Swin, she said wearily, her voice trembling. I told you that. Sure, but when we got married, you also promised fidelity, and look where we are now. If you couldn't keep that vow, why should I believe anything you say now? I made one mistake, one, she argued, her tone growing more desperate. I truly believe we can fix this if you're willing to try. I still love you, Swin, just as much as I always have. Now that everything's out in the open, we can use this as an opportunity to build something better. I scoffed, folding my arms across my chest. An opportunity? Arya, you betrayed my trust, lied to me, and made me look like a fool. If you did it once, what's stopping you from doing it again? My actions were a response to your inaction, she countered, her frustration evident. If we'd brought back the romance, added some spontaneity, and worked on being closer, maybe, I interrupted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Arya, you've laid out all your thoughts and feelings, but what about me? What about what I've had to deal with? She leaned forward, her eyes searching mine. Then let's be honest, Swin. You're not perfect either. Don't tell me you've never lied to me. Of course I've lied, I admitted bluntly. I've lied when I told you your new jeans didn't make your butt look big, or when I said I loved your haircut. But none of it justifies infidelity. Her shoulders slumped, and she sighed heavily. So that's it. It's over because you just don't care. You could say that, I replied coldly. But really, it's about my self-respect. I can't go against my principles and let this slide. Self-respect? What does that have to do with anything? She exploded, slamming her fork onto her plate. Seriously, Swin, are you telling me you can't give our marriage a second chance because of your bruised ego and stupid male pride? Yes, I made a mistake, but it's in the past. What matters is the future and what we can make of it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like everything's fine, I said firmly, my voice icy. No real man would accept what you've done. Her face twisted in disbelief, her hand rising to her mouth. You're seriously letting your pride ruin this? We could learn from this, Swin. I couldn't take the arguing anymore. The endless loop of blame and counterblame was exhausting. I sat silently, fuming as we finished the disastrous dinner. Afterward, I pulled out the divorce paperwork and placed it on the table in front of her. I think you should read these, I said flatly. Her face fell as she glanced at the documents, her disappointment clear. Fine, was all she said. Late that night, Arya joined me in the living room, her tone tentative. What are we going to tell the family? If you want me to be honest, I will, I replied. But I won't ruin your relationship with them. Let's just say we have different visions for the future. Thank you, she whispered softly, sadness evident in her voice. The following days were filled with paperwork and logistical discussions. We agreed to sell the house. It held no magic for either of us anymore. On Saturday, we gathered our families to break the news. Predictably, it hit them hard. Our parents were devastated, pleading with us to try counseling or therapy. Arya stuck to our story of simply growing apart, but our daughter Andrea was crushed. She rushed to help me move into my new place, though she couldn't understand my firm approach to the separation. Andrea tried to play mediator, not knowing the full story. She told me how heartbroken her mother was, and I knew the feeling all too well. Arya wasn't the only one in pain. My world had fallen apart too. One afternoon, while sitting at a small cafe downtown, I saw Arya walk in arm with another man. My first thought was curiosity. What had happened to her previous boyfriend? What was his name again? Oh right, Phil. When Arya noticed me, she smiled brightly and walked over, her companion by her side. I stood from my table, and we exchanged polite kisses on the cheek. Mind if we join you? She asked. I gestured to the empty chairs. Go ahead. After they settled across from me, Arya introduced her companion. Swin, this is Tim. Tim and I exchanged a brief handshake across the table before Arya launched into a stream of chatter, asking about my work and sharing updates about Andrea. Tim, however, seemed visibly uncomfortable as she talked. After a few minutes, he leaned toward her and murmured, I think I'll head upstairs. I'll see you after lunch. He leaned in to kiss her briefly before standing. Take your time, she replied with a warm smile as he walked away. Once he was gone, I couldn't help myself. So, what happened to your previous boyfriend? Arya blinked, momentarily caught off guard, before realization dawned. Oh, you mean Colin, she said with a casual wave of her hand. Well, I still see him, but it's nothing serious. And does he know about Tim? I asked, my tone dripping with sarcasm. She nodded, smirking. Of course, they know about each other. Like I said, it's casual, no commitments. I couldn't hide my disbelief. So how are you? She countered quickly, steering the conversation back toward me. Anyone special in your life? No, not at the moment, I replied. Swin, you need to get out more, she said, her expression turning serious. Andrea's really worried about you. She told me so. I'm fine, Arya. I'm happy, I grumbled, though it was far from the truth. She frowned, shaking her head. Liar. I know you better than that. Be honest. Have you been in a relationship since the divorce? I've gone on a few dates, I admitted reluctantly. But have you been in an actual relationship? She pressed. No, I muttered, feeling a wave of embarrassment wash over me. But it seems like you're doing just fine. Arya smiled, clearly at ease with herself. Yeah, once I got over the breakup and the divorce, life's been pretty busy. I made a conscious decision not to let it ruin the rest of my life. The words slipped out before I could stop them. How's Phil doing? Her lips curved into a knowing smirk. Phil's fine. You said it was over between you two, I reminded her, surprised. Are you still seeing him?
No, Swin.
It ended when we divorced because that's what you wanted. But afterward, I started seeing him again. At the time, I needed something light, and Phil was a nice guy. He made me happy. Shocked, I asked, so how many men are you seeing now? Arya shrugged nonchalantly. 3, maybe 4. It's casual. I stared at her, stunned by her honesty and how casually she spoke. Don't you have any shame? Why should I? She said, her tone light and unbothered. I'm honest with all my men. They know about each other. In fact, 2 of them have even met. Her lips quirked into a sly smile. We've even had a couple of nights together. My jaw tightened as I processed her words. You're talking about threesomes? Arya's pout gave way to a playful smile. Yes, and honestly, it was incredible, she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. Well, good for you, I said stiffly, my voice betraying me. Who was this woman? Was this the real Arya all along, hiding behind the guise of the modest wife I thought I knew? Arya leaned forward, her tone dropping to something softer. Listen, Swin, if you're interested, we could meet up sometimes. I never stopped loving you, not for a day. I'd be happy to have you back in my life.
I gavkede her, utterly flort.
You think I'd want to be part of your little harem? That I'd settle for being some fling when you're not busy? No thanks, Arya. That's not for me. Her expression turned sad, though her voice carried a faint note of teasing. That's a shame. We were good together, and there's still a place for you in my heart. No thanks, I said firmly. I'd rather keep my self-respect. Arya sighed dramatically. Ah, that silly male pride. Well, I hope it keeps you warm at night, Swin. She stood, kissed me lightly on the cheek, and left with a familiar swirl of her perfume. About a year and a half later, I received an invitation to Arya's wedding. Attending would have been unbearable, so I declined. Andrea was disappointed. I missed seeing her as a bridesmaid, but I couldn't bring myself to witness my ex-wife's triumph while I was still struggling to rebuild. As time passed, Arya seemed to thrive. Every time I saw her, she looked brighter, more radiant, and genuinely happy. Meanwhile, I was still stuck, unable to shake the bitterness and distrust left by her betrayal. At her parents' anniversary party, I finally met her new husband, Trevor. He seemed decent, and after a few rounds of whiskey, we ended up chatting at the bar. Why'd you divorce Arya? Trevor asked bluntly, his tone genuinely curious. I studied him, unsure if this was a jab or an honest question. She cheated on me, I replied flatly. Had an affair while she was away for work. Trevor didn't flinch. He just shook his head and said, Yeah? And? Stunned, I asked, what would you have done in my place? He shrugged casually. I don't know, man, but I wouldn't have let her go. Don't get me wrong. I'm glad you did. Your loss is my gain. But women like Arya don't come around often. Sipping his whiskey, he continued. Look, none of us are perfect. It was just sex. Who cares? If I were you, I'd have done everything I could to keep her. I stared at him, speechless. Trevor grinned. Arya's the sexiest woman I've ever been with. She's an amazing cook, works hard, and keeps a great home. What more could you ask for? I swallowed my bitterness, asking one last question. Aren't you worried she'll cheat on you too? Not at all, he said confidently. We're honest with each other. She told me everything about her affair with you. She's happy now, and so am I. Later, I watched them dance together, her body moving with the grace and sensuality I had always admired. Trevor was right about how stunning she was. But as I left that evening, my heart ached with the painful reminder that she had moved on, built a new life, while I remained stuck, unable to escape the quicksand of my own making.